Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Janani. Today I'm going to show you guys a highly requested technique. I'm not sure what to call it, so I'm calling it the crystal marble technique. Also, make sure you stick till the end to see how I made these interlocked linked earrings. For this technique, I'm going to be using a block of Polymer translucent. Usually I wouldn't condition if I'm doing this marbling technique, but since I'm tinting these translucent blocks, I'm going to be slightly conditioning these. To tint these, I'm going to be showing you guys just how I do it, but I have seen tons of makers use things like alcohol ink, but I don't have it, so here's how I do it. The first method is to use the tiniest smudge of another clay color. Here I'm using Wisteria by Primo and adding it to the translucent to tint it. This way it ensures that the transparency of the translucent is kept. For the second and third color, I use Primo Fluorescent Pink and Souffle Royalty. For this project, I wanted one block of translucent to left as is, but Primo translucent is very yellow, so I added the tiniest bit of ultramarine to offset it. And for the second method and my favorite, I'm going to be using one of those makeup palettes that I got back in the day when I thought this thing was going to recruit me. Anyhow, I ran my clay through the pasta machine on the thinnest setting for this one. Then I used an old makeup brush to brush a generous amount of eyeshadow onto the sheet of clay. Eyeshadows are a great way to add pearly and shimmery effect on clay. Then I chopped it up, mixing the pigment well into the clay. I also ran it through the pasta machine a couple of times to get an even mix. I repeated this method with 2 more colors. For the final method, I'm using mica powder. The shade I use is called turquoise. Mica powders are essentially the same as eyeshadow powders. They are much more pigmented. So here are all the colors. Top ones are made with adding other clay colors. Seconds are eyeshadow, and the last with mica. For the next step, it's important that your clay isn't too soft, so I let my clay rest in the fridge for about 10-15 minutes. After the clay have rested, I chopped all my colors. This is why firm clay is easier for this step, because when you chop them, they do not stick together. You can cut your pieces large or small. The larger your pieces are, the less marble it will look. Like always, I'll link all the tools and supplies down in the description box for you guys. After everything was chopped, I mixed the colors thoroughly, making sure there are no clumps. Here's the fun part. I'm using Craft Smart acrylic paint in vanilla, and I added about 2 drops to the pile. And I also used some micro pearl mica powder from Pearlix as well. Then I mixed them really well into the clay. I don't personally use a lot of paint, but just enough to dry it fast. You can choose to add as much as you please, but make sure it dries completely before you move on. And as always, I added a sheet of gold leaf and mixed it into the pile as well. To bind the clay back together, I used some liquid clay. I know most of you will ask if you can work without this. Personally, I find it easier to use the liquid clay, but if you mush and condition and work the pile very well, you might be able to bind it back together. I'm just lazy. You can completely skip this step, but I like to chop and mix the clay again. I add a little bit more mica powder and liquid clay to create a little bit more variation. After the clay is mixed thoroughly, I like to form it into a long cube shape and let it rest in the fridge for about 10-15 minutes. And here is the most satisfying part of the process. You can see the beautiful variation formed within the clay. I'm going to show you guys 2 ways to use these cut pieces. For the first one, I'm going to start placing them by overlapping, making sure everything is stuck nice and snug to form a slab. For the second way, I ran a piece of translucent clay through the pasta machine on the third thickest setting and start placing the cut pieces on it. These two are going to give drastically different results. For the first slab, I rolled and made sure everything sticks well and it was nice and smooth. I ran it through the pasta machine on the third thickest setting. Then I fold the slab again in half and ran it through the pasta machine again. This is going to give the slab a beautiful marbled effect. You can kind of cheat by ripping and placing pieces that you like anywhere. And of course, you can repeat this step until you are satisfied. And for the second slab, we are going to leave it as is and roll and make sure everything is nice and smooth. I ran it through the pasta machine on the third thickest setting. This is going to have that prominent vein effect. You don't have to use the third thickest setting, it's just what I'm comfortable with. So here are both of the slabs. You can see how different they turned out even though they are from the same technique. I just burnished and made sure everything is nice and smooth to cut. Next, I use cookie cutters to cut the shapes for the earrings. Don't forget to reuse the scrap clay. They can create a beautiful marble. I chopped mine up and reused again to create some tops for the earrings. I baked my pieces in the oven for an hour in 275 Fahrenheit. I like to bake my pieces on the tile that I work with, but I put them on a piece of regular printer paper or some cardstock first. And I also like to cover my work with a piece of foil when baking. And here they are after they were cooled down. You can see the difference between the two techniques. Then I sanded and drilled the holes on my pieces using my cordless sander. I will link the sander down in the description for you guys. As I promised, I'm going to show you guys how I made the interlocked earrings. For this, I used an X-Acto knife to cut a slit in one of the pieces. Then I looped the other piece through. I like to use either Loctite super glue, bacon bond, or liquid clay to close the slit. I added the tiniest amount of glue and let it dry for about an hour. Whenever I work with translucent clay, I like to finish them up with UV resin. The best way to resin these interlocked earrings is to go by sections. I first add resin to the opposite section of the pieces, and then after they were cured, I add resin to the other side. Just a side note, this isn't the only way to create these, but the way I find easier. Also, when working with resin, please wear proper gear and work in a ventilated area. I finished up all the rest of the pieces. I also added the jump rings and earring backs. So here's how everything turned out. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I tried to explain everything as much as I could and squeeze in as much information as I possibly could. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and also follow me on Instagram. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.